I was standing on my parents' porch with a homemade birthday cake when I heard my mother laugh inside. Then she said the sentence that changed my life forever. "Don't worry about the debt. Your sister will cover it. She never refuses family." My brother thanked them while discussing a loan I had never agreed to pay. I stood frozen outside the door, listening as they spent my money without even asking me. I drove home in silence. When I told my husband what I'd heard, he smiled, opened our banking app, and quietly said, "Move every dollar. Tonight." 1 week later, I finally understood why. My name is Rebecca Collins, and I was 37 years old when I finally realized there was a difference between being loved and being useful. For as long as I could remember, I had been the dependable one. If my parents needed help paying property taxes, they called me. If my younger brother, Kevin, missed another credit card payment, they called me. If someone needed a loan, a ride, or someone to organize a family emergency, they called me. Everyone praised my generosity. No one ever asked how much it was costing me. I never complained. I honestly believed that's what families did. My husband, Daniel, used to tell me I had the biggest heart of anyone he'd ever met. Then he'd smile and quietly add, "Just make sure nobody mistakes your kindness for obligation." I always laughed. My family would never do that. I believed those words. Until my mother's birthday. I'd spent 2 days baking her favorite lemon cake from scratch. Nothing fancy. Just the same recipe she taught me when I was 12. Daniel kissed my forehead as I carried the cake toward the car. "Tell your mom happy birthday." "I will. And don't stay too late." I smiled. "I won't." The drive to my parents' house took about 25 minutes. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Kevin's truck already parked outside. That wasn't unusual. Kevin visited whenever he needed something. I picked up the cake, walked toward the front porch, and reached for the doorbell. Then I heard voices. The front window was cracked open just enough for every word to drift outside. Kevin sounded worried. "I don't know what else to do. I owe almost $40,000. My mother's voice answered immediately. "Stop worrying." There was absolute confidence in her tone. "We'll figure it out. I can't keep asking the bank." "You won't have to." A chair scraped across the kitchen floor. Then my father spoke. "Rebecca has plenty in savings." I froze. Kevin sighed. "I hate asking her again." Mom laughed softly. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. She never refuses family." My heart skipped. Dad chuckled. "She'll probably transfer the money before the weekend." Kevin sounded relieved. "I knew you'd know what to do." Then Mom said the sentence that changed everything. "We won't even tell her until we've worked out exactly how much she should cover." Silence. I honestly wondered if I'd misunderstood. Maybe they meant something else. Maybe I was missing part of the conversation. Then Dad spoke again. "She and Daniel both have good jobs. They'll recover." Mom agreed, without hesitation. "Exactly. It's not like Kevin can manage this alone." My fingers tightened around the cake box until the cardboard bent. No one had asked me. No one had even considered asking. They were simply deciding how much of my family's savings belonged to someone else. I stood there for nearly a minute, unable to move, unable to breathe. The birthday candles inside the cake suddenly felt heavier than bricks. Finally, I turned around. Quietly, slowly, without knocking, without letting anyone know I had been there. I placed the cake on the passenger seat and drove away. The tears didn't come immediately. Instead, there was only silence. The kind that settles over you when everything you believed about the people you love begins falling apart. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun was beginning to set. Daniel was watering flowers near the porch. The second he saw my face, he set the hose down. "What happened?" I couldn't answer. He walked over, opened the passenger door, and noticed the untouched birthday cake. "You never went inside?" I finally whispered the words. I heard them. Heard who? My parents. And Kevin. Daniel didn't interrupt as I told him everything. Every sentence. Every laugh. Every assumption that my money already belonged to them. When I finished, he remained completely calm. He didn't criticize my family. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he walked into the house, picked up his laptop, opened our online banking account, and turned the screen toward me. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said 5 words that made my stomach tighten. Transfer every dollar tonight. I stared at Daniel. Transfer every dollar? He nodded once. Tonight. I shook my head. You're overreacting. I don't think my parents would actually take money without asking. He closed the laptop for a moment and sat beside me. I hope you're right. Then why move everything? Because hope isn't a financial strategy. His voice stayed calm. There was no anger, no insults, no accusations against my parents. Just quiet certainty. Rebecca, he said gently, your mother didn't say, let's ask her. I looked down. She said, she never refuses. I swallowed. I know. They've already decided the money belongs to Kevin. They're only deciding how much. Hearing those words out loud made my chest tighten. For years, I had confused generosity with responsibility. Maybe Daniel had seen it long before I did. What do we do? I asked quietly. He opened the banking app again. First, we protect our family. For the next 3 hours, we sat at the dining room table reviewing every account we owned. Checking, savings, retirement, college funds for the kids, emergency savings. Daniel wasn't rushing. He explained every step, every transfer, every document, every security setting. I watched as our savings moved into individual protected accounts that required both of our authorization. Nothing illegal, nothing dishonest, just responsible planning. When we finished, Daniel leaned back. I think we're done. Then he paused. Actually, he opened another folder. What's that? Our old emergency account. I frowned. I forgot we still had that. Years earlier, after my father had surgery, we'd opened an emergency account so my parents could help pay hospital bills if anything happened while we traveled. The emergency passed. Life became busy. We never thought about the account again. Daniel clicked through the permissions. His expression changed. Rebecca. What? Your parents still have authorized access. My stomach dropped. What? They can't empty everything, but they can request transfers. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All these years, we had simply forgotten. Daniel looked at me carefully. I'm not saying they'd use it, but we should remove every authorization. I nodded immediately. Do it. Within 20 minutes, every outdated permission was gone. We updated beneficiaries, changed security questions, enabled transaction alerts, requested written confirmation from the bank. When everything was finished, I felt strangely exhausted. Not because of the paperwork, because every click forced me to accept something I never wanted to believe. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry. For what? That you had to hear those things. I smiled weakly. I kept thinking I was imagining it. You weren't. He never once said, I told you so. He never criticized my parents. He simply protected the life we had built together. Over the next week, I tried convincing myself nothing would happen. Maybe the conversation had only been wishful thinking. Maybe Kevin would solve the problem himself. Maybe my parents would realize how unfair they'd been. Then my phone rang. Mom. I answered. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Sweetheart, how are you? I'm fine. Good. A brief pause followed. Then she asked the question I had been expecting. Kevin's going through a difficult time. I know. He needs a little financial help. I took a slow breath. I'm sorry he's struggling. So you'll help. For the first time in my life, I answered differently. No. Silence. What do you mean, no? I mean Daniel and I aren't giving anyone money. Mom's tone hardened. Rebecca, this is family. I know. Kevin has nowhere else to turn. He has options. You've never refused before. I know. Another long silence. Then Dad's voice appeared in the background. What did she say? Mom answered loudly enough for both of us to hear. She's refusing. Dad took the phone. I raised you better than this. I love you, Dad. But my answer is still no. He hung up without another word. I sat there staring at my phone. Daniel looked at me but said nothing. He simply handed me a cup of coffee. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my parents. It was our bank. The representative sounded professional. Mrs. Collins, we're calling regarding an attempted transaction on your former emergency account. My heart stopped. Attempted? By who? My heart stopped. Attempted? By who? The bank representative remained professional. I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins. For privacy reasons, I can't disclose the individual's identity over the phone. Can you tell me if they were authorized before? There was a brief pause. Based on the account history, the person previously had authorization. However, because the permissions were removed last week, the transaction was automatically declined. I closed my eyes. Daniel had been right. Every single word. Was any money taken? No, ma'am. Everything remains secure. Relief washed over me, followed almost immediately by something much heavier. Sadness. Not because of the money, because someone I trusted had actually tried. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my coffee. Daniel quietly walked in. The bank. I nodded. They tried. He didn't ask who. He already knew. Instead, he placed one hand gently on my shoulder. I'm glad we acted when we did. So am I. But part of me still needed answers. Not guesses. Not assumptions. The truth. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying flowers, or groceries, or an envelope with money. I was carrying questions. Dad answered the door. He looked surprised. Rebecca, can we talk? He stepped aside without saying a word. Mom and Kevin were already sitting in the living room. The second Kevin saw me, his smile disappeared. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody asked how I was. I remained standing. The bank called this morning. Silence. They said someone attempted to access the emergency account. Mom looked at Dad. Dad looked at Kevin. Kevin suddenly became very interested in the carpet. Finally, Dad sighed. We thought. He stopped. No. I interrupted quietly. Tell me the truth. Mom folded her hands together. We believed the account was still available. You believed, I repeated slowly, that you could take money without asking me? Her eyes filled with tears. We weren't taking it. It was only temporary. Kevin finally spoke. I was going to pay it back. I looked at him. Just like the $12,000 from 4 years ago? His face turned red. I eventually would have. And the $8,000 before that? He had no answer. Dad cleared his throat. Families don't keep score. I turned toward him. No, they don't. But families also don't spend someone else's money without permission. The room became painfully quiet. Mom wiped her eyes. We honestly thought you'd understand. That's exactly the problem. She looked confused. You never asked whether I understood. You decided for me. Dad leaned forward. Kevin was desperate. So you volunteered my savings. We knew you'd help. I smiled sadly. You knew the old Rebecca would. Nobody spoke. For years, I had answered every emergency, every unexpected bill, every financial crisis. Not because I was wealthy, because I couldn't stand watching people I loved struggle. Somewhere along the way, helping became expected, and expectations slowly became entitlement. I reached into my purse and placed a folder on the coffee table. Inside were copies of every loan I'd made to Kevin over the past 9 years. Every transfer, every check, every repayment, or, more accurately, every missing repayment. Kevin stared at the papers. I didn't know you kept all this. I'm an accountant. I keep everything. Dad flipped through the pages. The total sat highlighted on the final sheet. $67,840. Nobody said a word. I never asked for interest. I never asked for deadlines. I never embarrassed anyone. I helped because I believed family mattered. I gently closed the folder. But today I need something different. Mom looked up hopefully. What? Boundaries. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't accusing. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was simply protecting the life Daniel and I had worked so hard to build. I won't be giving anyone money anymore. Kevin opened his mouth. I raised my hand politely. I'm not finished. If any of you ever need help finding work, I'll help. If you need advice, I'll be there. If you need someone to watch your children, I'll make time. But my savings are no longer this family's emergency fund. No one argued, maybe because they couldn't, or maybe because for the first time they realized how much I'd quietly carried for all those years. 3 days later, relatives started calling. An aunt asked why I was abandoning Kevin. A cousin said I'd become too successful to care. Someone had clearly told only half the story. I ignored every rumor until one phone call changed everything. It was my grandfather's older brother, Uncle Thomas, the one person everyone in the family respected without question. His voice was calm. Rebecca, I think it's time everyone sits in the same room. And this time, we're going to hear the whole truth. The family meeting took place the following Sunday at Uncle Thomas's house. If there was one person everyone respected, it was him. He was 76 years old, calm, fair, and never interested in taking sides. When he asked people to show up, they showed up. By the time Daniel and I arrived, nearly everyone was there. My parents sat together on one couch. Kevin sat beside them, avoiding eye contact. My Aunt Linda, 2 cousins, and several relatives filled the remaining chairs. Nobody smiled. Uncle Thomas waited until everyone had settled before speaking. I've heard several versions of this story. He looked around the room. Today, we're only interested in one thing. The truth. He nodded toward my father. You may begin. Dad cleared his throat. We're not bad people. No one said you were, Uncle Thomas replied. Dad continued. Rebecca has always helped the family. Kevin fell into financial trouble. We believed she'd help again. Mom quickly added. When she refused, it felt like she'd turned her back on us. Several relatives nodded sympathetically. Kevin looked relieved. For a moment, I realized they actually believed their own version of events. Then Uncle Thomas turned toward me. Rebecca, your turn. I stood without rushing. I brought something. Daniel handed me a small binder. I placed it on the coffee table. This isn't my opinion. It's documentation. I opened the first page. 9 years ago, Kevin needed help after losing his job. I slid one bank statement forward. $12,000. Another page. 2 years later. 8,000. Another. 5,000. Then another. 3,000. Page after page. Loan after loan. Emergency after emergency. Not one argument. Not one complaint. Only quiet transfers made because I believed helping family mattered. The room became noticeably quieter. I turned another page. This column shows repayments. Most of the spaces were empty. Only a few small amounts appeared over the years. I looked toward Kevin. The unpaid balance today is $67,840. Kevin lowered his head. I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping records. Dad slowly flipped through the binder. His hands trembled. I didn't realize it was this much. You never ask. Mom looked genuinely shocked. I thought Kevin had paid most of it back. Kevin whispered. I couldn't. Daniel spoke for the first time. We never demanded repayment. We never charged interest. We simply wanted honesty. Nobody interrupted him. I pulled another folder from my bag. This one isn't about money. Inside were handwritten notes. Every birthday I had organized. Every holiday meal I had paid for. Medical bills. Home repairs. Even college textbooks I'd quietly purchased for cousins who couldn't afford them. I never shared these before. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I never wanted anyone embarrassed. I closed the folder gently. What hurt wasn't helping. What hurt was discovering my kindness had become an expectation. The room remained silent. Then Aunt Linda quietly asked, Is it true someone tried accessing your emergency account? I nodded. The bank confirmed an attempted transaction. I won't accuse anyone, but the permissions had to be removed because someone believed they still had access. Mom began crying. Dad slowly covered his face. Kevin finally stood. I did ask Mom if the account still worked. I thought.
He stopped.
I honestly thought Rebecca wouldn't mind. Those words echoed through the room. Wouldn't mind. Not because anyone had asked. Because everyone assumed. Uncle Thomas looked directly at Kevin. Do you hear yourself? Kevin nodded weakly. I do now. He turned toward me. I'm sorry. I stopped seeing your help as a gift. I started treating it like it belonged to me. For the first time that afternoon, I believed he meant it. I looked around the room. I didn't come here for an apology. I came because I wanted the truth to exist in the same room as the rumors. No one argued. No one defended the old story anymore. Uncle Thomas slowly stood. I believe we've finally heard both sides. Then I took a slow breath and looked at every member of my family. I am willing to forgive all of you. Several faces immediately relaxed. Then I finished the sentence. But only if one condition changes everything. The room stayed silent. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on me. No one interrupted. No one argued. They were waiting. I took a slow breath before speaking again. My condition is simple. If we're going to be a family again, we start over with honesty. I looked directly at Kevin. If you ever ask me for financial help again, the answer won't automatically be yes. He nodded quietly. I understand. If I choose to help, it will be because Daniel and I both decide it's the right thing to do. No assumptions. No promises made on my behalf. No conversations about my money unless I'm sitting in the room. I turned toward my parents, and no one will ever volunteer my savings to someone else again. Dad slowly stood. You have my word. His voice cracked. I should have protected you instead of depending on you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he walked over and wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't the confident embrace I remembered from childhood. It was the hug of a father who finally understood how badly he had failed his daughter. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I truly am. I hugged him back. I know. Mom stepped forward next. Tears filled her eyes. I kept telling myself you didn't mind helping. I never stopped to ask whether it was becoming too much. She reached into her purse and removed a folded envelope. I know this doesn't erase anything, but it's a start. Inside was a handwritten repayment plan. She and Dad had already begun selling and used equipment from their workshop to repay part of what Kevin owed me. I looked up in surprise. You don't have to do this. Dad gently shook his head. Yes, we do. It's not about the money. It's about taking responsibility. Kevin stepped forward. I've already accepted a second job. I'll be making monthly payments too. I smiled softly. I appreciate that. But understand something. I'm not measuring your apology by dollars. I'm measuring it by your actions. He nodded. You'll see the difference. Over the following months,
I did.
Kevin kept every promise. He reduced unnecessary spending, started paying down his debts himself. For the first time since his 20s, he stopped expecting someone else to rescue him. My parents changed too. They no longer volunteered my time. They no longer spoke for me. Whenever someone in the family asked for help, Dad would simply say, "You'll have to ask Rebecca yourself." It was such a small sentence, yet it changed everything. Because respect had finally replaced expectation. One evening, several months later, Daniel and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset. I reached over and took his hand. You were right. He smiled. I'd rather have been wrong. I laughed quietly. I almost ignored you that night. I know. What made you so certain? He looked across the yard where our children were chasing fireflies. When people stop seeing generosity as a gift, they eventually start believing they're entitled to it. I couldn't let that happen to us. I leaned my head against his shoulder. Thank you. You didn't just protect our savings. You protected my ability to keep loving my family without losing myself. He squeezed my hand. You've always had a generous heart. I just wanted to make sure nobody mistook it for an open bank account. A few weeks later, my parents invited everyone over for Sunday dinner. For the first time in years, no one asked me to pay for groceries. No one hinted about bills. No one joked about borrowing money. Instead, we laughed, shared stories, played cards after dessert. The evening felt lighter than any family gathering I could remember. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because the expectations had. As Daniel and I drove home, I looked out the window and smiled. For years, I believed loving my family meant saying yes to everything they asked. Now I understood something far more important. Real love doesn't require silent sacrifice. It requires honesty, respect, and boundaries that protect everyone involved. Sometimes the strongest word you can say to the people you love isn't yes. Sometimes it's a calm, respectful no. Because the healthiest families aren't built on one person carrying everyone else's burdens. They're built on people who care enough to stand beside each other, without standing on each other.